Okay. It is 7:06, and I am calling to order the Monday, May 18th meeting of the Norton Charter Commission. In attendance are all members, with the exception of Keith Silver, who will not be joining us this evening, and Denise Luciano, who will hopefully be joining us soon. I've texted her. We did roll call. We have no flag. We're ready to go. Let's start with the acceptance of the minutes of May. Let me forget which minute. May. They're all running together. May 4th. If you want to hang on a second, I'll share my screen with everybody. And I'll pull them up. Okay. Whenever everybody is ready, I will accept a motion to accept the meeting minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Any other discussion?
Who was the first? Sorry.
Janie Goodwin,
Carrie.
I believe. Oh, was it Carrie?
Carrie was first, Janie seconded.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any further discussion on meeting minutes? Hearing none, seeing none. Carrie?
Yes?
Sandy?
Yes.
Dave Heaney?
Yes, I was on mute, sorry.
Denise just said she'll be there in 5 minutes. Janie Goodwin?
Yes.
Dave Wren?
Yes.
Kevin Schleicher?
I wasn't here, I'm going to abstain.
Okay, I am also in favor of the minutes of May 4th. And that's everybody. I got everybody. We're passed. Minutes are accepted. We have nobody in the queue, nobody here. From the public, I'm going to close public forum. I know I'm sounding like a broken record. I would love to tell you I had something to share with you from Lauren, but I do not. I also know she's been fairly inundated. She told us, I think in our last attendance in our meeting physically, that May was very bad because of town meetings, and I suspect with everybody trying to reschedule and everything else, it probably has not improved any. So I've let up a little bit on her. I figured we'll get through all the decisions we need to make, and then I'll bug her every 2 days. We'll just go from there. So I have nothing back from her. I don't have anything further from Senator Feeney's office. I did do a quick follow-up just to see if there was any movement. I haven't seen anything, but if and when I do, I'll forward it to everybody so you have it as well. With that being said, let's move on to our continuing discussion of the citizen participation measures. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and bring up the spreadsheet that we looked at last week. And just, let me bring this part up. So we had discussed last week. So let's start from the beginning. We had gone through pre-petition of a group initiative and referendum measures. We found in some half of the town charters that we read that the participation measures may apply to not only town council but to school committee. And we had a discussion last week as to whether we felt it was appropriate that they apply to school committee as well. I think we were all in Carrie had mentioned she'd like to hear from them directly, and I think we're all in favor of letting them weigh in on that subject. So to that end, I spent a good 7 to 10 days trying to schedule a meeting with Sherry and Denise. Concurrently, I had it done, should have happened, and it didn't. Sherry had some personal things and needed to handle those. So I went forward with just Denise because I wanted to get it in front of the school committee. So initially, when I was first mentioning the availability of these measures to citizens, he was not at all inclined or in favor of including the school committee. And however, so I shared these spreadsheets with him. And once we talked about the thresholds and the requirements of what was actually needed in order to get some of these things enacted, he was much more comfortable, and actually so much more comfortable, was inclined to, or at least his vote would have been, he was inclined to accept the school committee to be within those citizen participation measures. However, he's not the final vote. One of the things that was also interesting that I did a little research on my own was I was wondering if within the town of Amherst and North Attleborough, if perhaps the school committee had their own policy on citizen participation measures, which was why, hang on, I'm going to get Denise in. All right, Denise should be joining us at 7:13 p.m., which, if I remember the minutes correctly, I think was the time she joined last week. So she's consistent. So interestingly, I found that there is a association out there that does, hold on 1 second, I'm just going to pull it up. It's in here. So it is the Massachusetts, no, I don't remember what it stands for. Massachusetts Association of School Committees. They put together a template outline of what should be included in all school committee policy manuals. So much so that there is an actual section dedicated solely to citizen participation measures. And it is coded EEDH. And when you do a search in any town, you can find the school committees. They refer to them as public participation measures. They're not quite as robust as the citizen participation measures, but it answered the question to me, is that why some towns included the school committee within their charter and some did not. And it turns out that every charter that we looked at actually used this exact template and had their own set of public participation measures. So that wasn't the answer. Regardless, so talked to Denise. He was inclined to accept it. He wanted to bring it back to the school committee and have a further discussion with them, and he would get back to us. So I shared with him the subset that was pertaining to school committee, which is the free petition, the initiative, and the referendum. And I also sent him the list of excluded measures with the caveat that we had not yet reviewed it, and we would be going through those this evening to see if they wanted to be included in those as well. So his position was for those folks who feel that the school can there's no oversight, can kind of, wield their power with impunity, and there's nothing to do to stop them. He thought this being included within the citizen participation measures might be a good faith effort to demonstrate their actual transparency, and that they are perfectly happy to have initiatives brought forward and hear free petitions and be subject to referendum. This position, kind of similar to ours, was that there are that many people that are upset about a measure that they have passed and want to take action on it, then they should give it a second view. So with that being said, so just to recap from last week, we had decided on the free participation measures and what was going to be required: 100 voters, signatures in no particular format, and it gets them a public hearing to address their particular issue. And there's no limitation on how often a subject can be brought forth. With the initiative, we had decided that the initial number of signatures on the petition only needed to be 250. The town council and or school committee, if they so desire, has 30 days from the point that the town attorney deems the initiative lawful to take action, and they could defer it to town vote if so desired. If it was rejected or a measure was passed in lieu of the initiative suggested, it is then open to supplemental provision, which forces the town vote. And in order to do that, they need 10% of the registered voter signatures. It can include the initial 250, but they have to sign the supplemental petition separately. They have 45 days to get that together. And once it goes to a town vote, in order for that initiative to pass, 15% of the registered voters need to come out and vote on that measure. Referendum, just to recap, is to turn over a measure by town council and or school committee. We had decided that we wanted a smaller number in order to bring that up, but something that was manageable, but still a somewhat high hurdle to reach. We came up with a decision of 7.5% of the registered voters, which right now is 943. As we discussed, they're going to need a little bit of a buffer to make sure all the signatures are actually registered voters. They have 21 days from the point at which the measure had been passed to get that petition in. And it goes to a vote if the town council has deemed it lawful and town council and or school committee have not rescinded it on their own. In order for the referendum to pass, 20% of the registered voters have to come out and vote on it. So let's talk a little bit next about what measures should be excluded from initiatives and referendums. And again, I put together, for Kevin who wasn't here last week, those are the 6 town charters that I had kind of put a chart together to do a compare and contrast. Going down the left are the full collection of measures that are things that are excluded from initiative and referendum measures. And then I've put an X where everything, where they were applicable under each town. And the towns of Barnstable, Randolph, and Watertown, just to recap, are the ones that include school committee within the referendum and initiative measures. So that's why they are highlighted. The one we're probably going to wind up excluding or not really looking at too closely was Franklin. They had a very odd charter in that they had very few exclusions. One was emergency measures, which was across the board, everybody has them. The only other thing that they excluded from referendum was measures to appropriate sums of less than $50,000. Everything else was free game. It could, the citizens can force a vote on something in particular or overturn anything else other than those two things. So, the one thing I wanted to bring up, if we can look at numbers 6 and 7, please. I had them as two separate line items, but interestingly, there was no overlap. So in most of the charters, the way it was written was revenue loan orders. In Amherst, who they do things always a little bit differently, they had it written as votes for the temporary borrowing of money in anticipation of revenue. Does everybody, my question is I started looking at it and was wondering, I think that might actually be the same thing. Is that everybody else's interpretation, so that we could actually remove one of these line items and just put it across the board at revenue loan orders seems to be a more common way of putting it. Does anybody know? I can defer to town council if nobody happens to know this offhand or had a different interpretation of it.
No, I mean, I agree with you that it looks like the same thing, but I don't know.
Yeah. Anybody else? All right, I'm gonna go to Lauren on that and just ask, and if so, I'm gonna combine those two. Just give me a second. Okay, so with that being said, the ones that are applicable to, so the ones that are in yellow are the ones that were applicable to one town in particular, maybe two towns. Everything else, almost verbatim, these were included. There were, other than Franklin, wasn't much variation amongst the towns. On the first one, any proceedings that are related to the internal organization or operation of the town council or of the school committee. Amherst took theirs a step further and included any elected body at all, which I think goes a little bit too far, in my opinion, but I'm open to discussion if somebody feels strongly about it. 5 of the 6 towns, again, if we just exclude Franklin, it was unanimous, have that measure excluded from referendum initiatives. Does anybody have any strong opinions about this particular exclusion and whether or not it should include other elected bodies?
I mean, if we're just talking about the internal organization and operation, I'm not sure why it should be up to the public as to how that is. It's sort of, I interpret that as being like how we're going to come up with subcommittees or how we're going to, select the chairperson.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. So
I agree. I think it could, especially with
it could be very disruptive to an elected body, but I don't feel strongly.
Yeah, I think especially within the first year after, if and when the charter passes and all of the committees and subcommittees that are forming and putting their own policies in place, I think with people being able to challenge them could make their work very, very challenging. We probably don't want to set them up for that, although if it's related to town council, it's free game, but it is what it is. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and accept that one. The next one is the town budget as a whole, with the exception of Franklin, universally accepted as an excluded item from initiative and referendum. Is everybody in agreement there? Or let me put it this way, does anybody disagree with this being?
Just out of curiosity, when we say the town budget as a whole, does that mean the town budget as one big unit, or does that mean anything to do with the town budget whatsoever?
No, it's the town budget as a whole, so it would be the final vote by the town council to accept the budget, which does imply that a particular line item could be challenged.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Sure. That's my interpretation. Does anybody have any strong feelings about not including this or amending this in some way? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and make that part of ours. The next one, this is interesting, the school committee budget as a whole. Now, remember we talked about the yellow highlighted towns are the ones that include the school committee in their citizen participation measures. And strangely enough, 2 of them are included in here, but for example, Barnstable is not. So I'm kind of viewing this as this should probably be our decision and not necessarily the school committees. And I'm of the opinion we should probably treat this the same way that we treated the town budget, and accept it so that it makes their job a little bit easier. Does anybody have?
I'm curious as to why it would be a separate. If the school committee budget is part of the town budget,
Yes.
I would think that it was already included in the exclusion.
I would too, but I have a feeling it's probably the school committee does have their own budget. They do have to submit it as part of the town budget. So it would appear that, there would be a vote by the school committee when that budget was presented to the town to be incorporated into the town budget.
So that is a different than saying on the town budget, because the school committee budget is a line item of the budget.
Okay, so this sounds like then it's more the internal budget of the
Yeah,
school committee.
that's very strange, because we don't, and the town council is not going to vote on the particular items within the school committee budget. They're gonna vote on the school committee budget as a whole.
Right.
So I find it strange that they would include that. Because
However we need to do it, I think we should exclude it.
what's that?
I said, however we need to do it, I would think we want to exclude this from referendum or initiative petition.
So you're saying if somebody felt that the school committee or the school, they wanted the schools to have more or less money, they couldn't appeal that?
No, the so I'm looking at this as like if it's just a line item of the town budget as a whole, then it looks like it would be subject to referendum if we're interpreting that to mean that individual line items can be done. But if we do as Randolph and Watertown have done, then that it's not subject to referendum or initiative.
I'm not sure if that's what it's saying though, because this is the school committee. I think I'm assuming Randolph and Watertown are the towns that have the school committee as included as a referendum, right? So this is more of a, if you wanted to appeal the school committee's decision, not the town council's decision.
Right, in other words, they're subjecting the school committee's decisions on everything other than the budget to initiative and referendum.
I guess first of all, you need to decide if we're going to include the school committee in this piece. before we decide on this, because this is gonna relate specifically to their decisions as opposed to town council's decisions. And so that's kind of interesting. So you can't appeal the school committee. You can't say to them, we don't like your vote on your budget. But then when the town council votes on the school's budget, you can appeal that.
If that's how number 3 is interpreted, I don't know. I don't know if as a whole means as the whole or.
Well, how do you
Because
can,
even the town council doesn't have line item veto power in our charter or in these other charters that we've seen.
I'm wondering if it was put in there because of the fact that so much of their budget is related to money they get from the state, that it's just too complicated to let somebody just start monkeying around with it.
but again, that's not what this is saying. This is saying that the school committee, you can't, so when the school committee takes their vote on the budget, you
Yeah.
can't appeal that. You can't, put a referendum forward on that. But
Right.
going back to 3, you can have an issue, or you can have an appeal when they, on that line item, on the budget for the schools, since it is one line item of the budget.
Oh,
And that would just be the local,
So
the local money going to the school committee.
so it does,
schools,
it's almost,
this is saying the school committee's decision, you can't appeal their decision. So again, first we have to decide whether we're gonna include the school committee, because this is specific to them. And then, I don't know, I think this is one of those I'd like to hear from Lauren as to.
yeah. So having heard Sandy explain it a little bit further, it almost sounds as if, at least in Randolph and Watertown, with having the town budget as a whole means you can't appeal a line item, except in the case where you've got the school committee budget in there, in which case then that is a line item that you can't fight. So it's almost a way of blocking that particular line item from being overturned or challenged. Did I lose Sandy? I lost Sandy.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly wouldn't mind an interpretation from Lauren, as Sandy suggested.
Yeah, hang on 1 second, I just want to see if she's still. She's gone, she's dropped. Okay, okay.
I guess I don't fully understand the difference between the two, right? Because if the school committee budget is a line item in the town budget, am I reading it wrong? It seems almost like it's two of the same things. Like you're doing the same thing. You're opening up to, questioning that budget, whether it's through 3 or 4. So
Yeah.
it seems repetitive. So I feel like there must be something I'm confused about.
The
Right.
4 actually says it's not subject to opening it up,
Okay, so
because you're excluding it from
Yeah.
referendum and initiative processes.
So by number 3, if you interpret number 3 as stating, you can't challenge the budget as a whole, but you can challenge a line item. Number 4 is saying, but you can't challenge the school budget line item.
okay, so you can challenge all these items except school budget. That's what 3-4 says.
Think so now, having heard Sandy talk a little bit more. But again, I think we should probably get Lauren to weigh in.
Which was pretty important as well, because there's a couple towns that obviously have them different in 3 and 4, so it can't be the same. It can't be in the same if there's towns, there's 3 or 4 towns that are doing it different.
Yeah. And interestingly, I did find it very interesting that the 2 of the towns that included the school committee, or 2 of the 3, had that in here, but Barnstable, where Barnstable does have school committee subject to initiative and referendum, did not make the school committee budget an exclusion from those.
I will say, I think it's a real hit on the power of these elected bodies, if you're gonna monkey with their, these minute details in the budget. oh, we might not want to do that, but.
Alright.
And then there's also the question of how much, how much interference can you do with the school budget? Because they've got so many other state guidelines that they're following through that the layperson doesn't understand, and what can you touch and what can't you touch. And I think that gets into a whole other host of problems.
Well,
Yeah,
if you recall, both initiative and referendum both have to go to town council to be deemed legal, meaning they can be moved forward. So I think what would happen is town council would come back and say, sorry, this is not a legal measure that you can take action on. Just looking to see if Sandy's back in. I don't have anything from her yet. Okay. All right, so we are going to leave this. Nope, not there. We're going to leave this as a question and get some guidance from Lauren. And we will go from there. Do we still have everybody else? Amy, David, Denise, Kevin, Gary. Okay. All right, we're gonna move on. We'll let her weigh in if she comes back with anything. Appropriation of funds to implement a collective bargaining agreement. I think that's kind of self-explanatory. I think even if they were brought up, the town council is just going to say, can't do anything about it, regardless of whether it's excluded or not.
Yeah, anything that has to do with a legal obligation, I would think we'd want to exclude.
Okay, anybody have a strong opinion differently? Okay, go ahead and accept that. Okay, assuming revenue loan orders, votes for the temporary borrowing of money in anticipation of revenue. I have to assume those are the same thing. They sort of read the same way. And across the board, with the exception of Franklin, all towns do accept them. I think Amherst explains it a little bit better as to what's excluded. If you want to hang on, I'm going to jump over to the actual charters and see if there was anything. In some cases I did just kind of the footnote versions of the excluded. There's Sandy. I think that's Sandy. Sandy, are you back?
Yep, well, I'm back, sort of. I mean, I have no internet and I have very little signal, so
Oh, no.
I'll see what I can do.
Okay. All right, to catch you up, we put a question mark next to the school committee budget as a whole. We're going to ask Lauren. I think the way we seem to be in agreement is that you can challenge the town budget as a whole, but no line items. Oh, sorry, reverse that. You can you cannot challenge the budget as a whole, but you can go after certain line items, and I think what number 4 is trying to do is exclude that as a line item that can actually be challenged. But we'll have Lauren weigh in on it, and then we'll have some feedback from the school committee as well as to whether they want to be in there or not. We've gone on to include appropriation of funds to implement a collective bargaining agreement. We assume that this was probably, if it was brought up for initiative or referendum, town council would come in and say they can't. So it's just probably a standard exclusion across the board. The one thing that we were talking about earlier was numbers 6 and 7, the revenue loan orders and the votes for temporary borrowing of money in anticipation of revenue. What I was doing just now is looking to see, in some cases I use kind of just a shorthand to identify what the particular exclusions are. But you can see in this, so I'm looking at Barnstable right now, it is literally revenue loan orders. There is no further clarification of that, and I'm just looking to see if anybody else had anything a little bit meatier, I guess, or more with more explanation. Let's see. Random. I forget where Franklin put theirs. Initiative, referendum, recall. Did I go by it? Oh, Franklin's the weird town that doesn't have any. That's why. Okay. North Attleborough. This is North Attleborough. Yeah, again, it's as simple as revenue loan orders. All right, so we will ask Lauren for clarification there. Okay. Stop sharing. And we'll go back into the spreadsheet. Okay, everybody can see the spreadsheet? Everybody at once. Okay, so again, I'm going to assume that these are here for a reason because they are utilized across the board. Does anybody have any strong opinions as to why they should be removed from measures that cannot be challenged by initiative or referendum? Hearing none. Check that off. I will get clarification from Lauren on if there is a difference between 6 and 7, and we can come back to that. Across the board, appropriation for the payment of debt or debt service. Again, it's probably one of those things similar to the collective bargaining agreement that we probably don't want to be giving citizens any sort of control over, related specifically to our servicing of debt. That's not a good idea. So unless anybody feels strongly about this, I'm going to check it off as an exclusion for Norton. Hearing none. Okay. The next two are similar. One was in Amherst, one was in Franklin. And in Amherst, they had an appropriation of any sum of money for the purpose amounting to less than 1% of the total annual budget of the town. Franklin had a specific dollar amount associated with it, which was $50,000. My assumption is that this was to prevent any time being spent on nominal amounts. Does anybody have any feelings on whether we should include a similar item? These may very well have been in, well, the exception of Franklin, which doesn't have well, Franklin has it as an exclusion, but even then, it's by referendum only. So somebody could actually have an initiative, but it would be to appropriate money, and I don't think you can force town council to spend money that way. So we'll move on from there. And I'm assuming Amherst is probably in response to something in particular. I did not see a particular need for either 9 or 10. Does anybody have any different opinion?
I do not have a different opinion.
Excellent. All right, hearing none. I'm going to move on. We'll leave those blank. Emergency measures, I'm going to assume, is something that's required by law, and across the board, every town that we reviewed had them. Unless somebody wants to, or has a different feeling on this, I'm going to go ahead and accept that as an excluded. Emergency measures are excluded from initiative and referendum. Hearing none. Okay. Proceedings, providing for the submission of or referral of a matter to voters at an election. So these are things that have been brought up to the town by some measure for a vote. And basically this is saying if they've passed, you can't reverse it, which seems perfectly reasonable to me. Anybody have a feeling strongly the other way? Hearing none, we'll go ahead and accept that. Okay, the next one seemed to be utilized pretty much across the board with some minor changes to the language. Proceedings related to the election, appointment, removal, discharge, employment, promotion, transfer, demotion, or other personnel action of employees. Amherst, similarly to the first one that added any elected body, they wanted to include any appointed or elected official or member of a multiple member body. North Attleborough came forward and added in there, or any other action that is executive rather than legislative in nature. Sandy, do we have you back? Just dawned on me, you're on video. Can you see? Okay. Okay, I was gonna email you the document. Okay. I'm assuming we are going to accept this in some manner. Does anybody have the base text is what's over here to the far left. Does anybody have a strong opinion about widening that to appointed or elected officials or other members of multiple member bodies? Does anybody like the clarification that North Attleborough included?
I actually like that one.
Okay.
But
does anybody dislike?
I kind of like I was just going to say, I kind of like the Amherst one as well. I don't dislike the North Attleborough one. I was still focused on the Amherst one. That just feels like the kind of thing that we want the board to be able to do and not have to be looking over their shoulder the whole time.
Mm-hmm. We could include both clarifications, North Attleborough's and Amherst, if we were in favor of both of them. They don't compete. Anybody else have a different position or opinion? Is everybody inclined to accept Amherst's wording?
I am.
Yeah.
Hey, Laura, just a quick logistical question. The way you're set up, I've been doing a lot of head nodding here. Can you see all of us right now, or are you just seeing what the screen that you're sharing? Because I don't know if my non-verbals are being communicated back to you.
I've been doing the same thing.
Mechanism.
Yeah, I have you all to the right in little thumbnails. So yeah, I kind of look up and, I am assuming if you have an issue with something I've raised, please take yourself off mute and speak up. Because at that point, I'm just kind of looking for general consensus and, start waving your hands around if you really, if you're against it and want to be heard.
Got it.
All right.
Sorry for the interruption, but thank you for
That's
clarifying.
fine. Sure. Okay. I forget where we left off. Is anybody opposed to adding the wording used by Amherst? Okay. Is anybody, I think Carrie said you liked Attleborough's? North Attleborough's?
Yes, not to the exclusion of Amherst, but in addition to.
Correct. Does anybody feel differently about the wording in North Attleborough? Okay. All right, so then we are inclined to accept the wording as used with the additional clarification by Amherst and North Attleborough. Is anybody opposed to that? Okay. Oh, okay. Come on, you can do it. There we go. All right, so we've got that. All right, we're almost done here. Moving right along. Any proceedings repealing or rescinding a measure or part thereof which is protested by referendum procedures. Essentially what this is saying is something that was already overturned by referendum can't be re-overturned by referendum. Why this wasn't included across the board, I don't know. I was sort of the opinion that something that was passed by referendum probably should not be able to be overturned, and would have assumed that was legal. But Franklin doesn't have much of anything, but Barnstable did not include this in their charter. Does anybody feel strongly that a measure that has been passed by referendum should not be allowed to be put up for referendum again, meaning to reverse the referendum? If that makes all kinds of sense.
If it prevents a battle of the referendums, sure.
Yeah. I'm inclined to accept that. Does anybody feel differently about accepting that measure? All right, so we're going to go ahead and accept that. The last one on the list, resolutions, memorial actions, citations, other non-binding actions meant to convey a sense of the council rather than to establish rules for the operation of government. This was not in, I probably should have highlighted this. Well, it was included in more than one charter. In Amherst, it was just memorial actions, and this wording in particular came from North Attleborough. I think to try and tamp down maybe some of the frivolity. Again, hang on. Peter's about to join us. Hang on. Okay. Does anybody feel strong? Not a lot of towns use this. Does anybody feel strongly about including it within our charter? Meaning that any memorial action, citation, anything non-binding, not related to the operation of government, should be able to be overturned or brought up or forced, I guess, under an initiative measure.
I mean, I think it makes sense to exclude those things, but I don't know how big a problem it is.
Seeing as North Attleborough is the last charter to be drafted, I'm wondering if that is kind of the new standard language going forward.
Right, and Amherst was fairly recent too, right?
The Amherst, I think out of these would have been, it was either Amherst or Watertown. I think it was Amherst that was the second to last one.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I do think it makes sense that that shouldn't be part of a referendum, but.
I'm not even sure I fully understand it. Can you give me an example of what it's talking about?
So let's say, like, for example, last Thursday at the Board of Selectmen meeting, the Board of Selectmen decided that Norton was going to be a Purple Heart community. Somebody could take I don't know who, but that's the type of thing. So it would be a memorial action, something along those lines, something that isn't legislative, doesn't really have anything to do with the operation of the town. Or if somebody wanted to put a plaque or a sign or some sort of memorial thing town council voted on, that would be excluded. The citizens couldn't overturn that. I don't know why they'd want to, but so
Yeah, I don't know why. I don't know why it would be there either. I'd be inclined to exclude it, but
yeah,
that's my preference.
as would I. Does anybody feel strongly the other way? Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead. Do we want to include this full list that North Attleborough did, or just simply memorial actions?
I would say any non-binding, because otherwise you're tying up the polls with things that don't have anything to do with the running of the town.
Okay. Anybody feel strongly in the opposite opinion?
I don't. I was going to say I agree.
Okay. All right, so. All right, were there any other things that anybody, I'm not even sure where you would come across. I've read 6 of the charters. There wasn't a heck of a lot of variation amongst them. Is there anything anybody else feels strongly should be excluded from initiative and referendum measures? Okay. All right, I think we're going to put a cap on that. Moving on, the last thing we have to discuss is recall. And hang on 1 second. Shrink this down a bit. Actually, I'm going to put you guys down here. Alright, I'm just doing it. I can't put you there. That's where I want to talk, so I'm going to put you up here. Okay, so this is where, damn it. Hang on 1 second, sorry. I got rid of my toolbar. There we go. Give myself more room. Okay. So, recall. So this is a little bit different in that we actually already have a recall section within our charter. So with respect to the limitations, they have to have been in office for at least 6 months and have at least 6 months remaining on their term. And they cannot be the subject of a second attempted recall until 60 days after the first recall election. It can be initiated with the affidavit of 100 voter signatures. It requires the grounds be stated in the recall petition. The number of signatures required is 15% or 1,886 using current measurements for registered voters. The vote, whoever has initiated the affidavit or the petition for recall has to collect 15% of the signatures within 30 days of filing the affidavit. And this varies from town to town. The outcome is if the officer does not resign within 5 days of notice by the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Selectmen can order a recall election to be held within 64 to 75 days. And again, the number of days seem to vary quite a bit from town to town. They were all, well, not quite a bit. They did vary, but for different reasons. One of the things that we've been talking about quite a bit is can the subject of a recall appear on the ballot for re-election. We talked a little bit about this last week, in which town council's opinion is the person has a constitutional right to appear on the ballot. The way our charter is currently written, it specifically excludes that person from being on the ballot. In certain towns, there was a required voter participation percentage in order to get it to pass. Our town is majority only. So whoever shows up, if the majority votes to have that person recalled, they are then recalled. And then we were one of the few towns that had a restriction on the future activities of somebody who had been recalled. And ours states that they cannot be appointed to any town office within 2 years after the recall, or they have resigned following a recall attempt. Barnstable is even a little bit more, actually no, ours is the most restrictive. Barnstable was 1 year. And no other towns had any other restrictions that were reviewed. So, 1, 2, 3, 4. Interestingly, out of the 6 charters that we did review for the purposes of citizen participation measures, 2 of them, which 2 I've got to remember, had no recall provision in them whatsoever. So, sorry, give me 1 second. We had Barnstable, so Amherst, there is no provision for recall within the town of Amherst whatsoever. There is no bylaw, and there is no Mass General Law pertaining to recall. So if it is not in the charter, you can't do it, which I found very, very interesting. So Amherst did not have one, and I'm trying to remember what the other town, Watertown. So Amherst and Watertown had absolutely no mechanism whatsoever to be able to recall an elected official, which that is an option that we have available to us. Again, just to preface, if it's not there, there is no backup. We don't defer to bylaw, we don't defer to Mass General Law, there's nothing, that's it. There's no way to recall a person if it appears to be no way to recall anybody if it's not included within the charter. So why don't we start with the basics in that do, we want to retain a provision for recall within the charter.
Yes.
I would agree 100% yes.
Okay. Does anybody disagree with that? All right, hearing and seeing none. Okay, so then we have to decide, are we happy with the way it is currently written? So let's just literally go down the line just like we have been doing, and we can talk about what we feel are more, maybe more appropriate going forward. We may have no changes whatsoever and want to keep it as is, but let's have a chat about each line item. So, do we agree that the person has to have been in office for at least 6 months and have 6 months remaining on their term?
Yes,
I'm good with that.
can I just say as a general concept, this is one of those areas, I know we brought this up before in a couple other places too, that this isn't something that came up as an issue in any of our feedback, right? I don't recall ever seeing anyone comment there's an issue in this area.
No.
Okay.
And from what I understand, when we tried to do a little bit of research on can the person be the subject, appear on the ballot if they've been the subject of a recall, there's been, recall in general, not widely used, well, even if it's been widely used as a misnomer. It has been used. It has not necessarily been successful in a lot of the towns that we've seen. You see very few articles pertaining to the townspeople going to vote to recall, with the exception of Fall River being a fairly notorious recent one. I've seen a couple where the attempt has been made and the person has chosen to resign in lieu of being recalled. And in some cases, they will, resign citing health issues, family issues, something of that nature. It doesn't even get to the point where the Board of Selectmen has to notify them they've gotten wind of the petition and resigned in advance of even the petition coming in. Does everybody feel that those are fair terms that we would like to keep? They have to have been in office for 6 months and have 6 months remaining on their term?
Yes.
Sounds fair.
Okay. Anybody feel strongly and differently? Or strongly different? Differently strong? Okay. All right, so we're going to go ahead. How do we feel about the second attempt? Do we want to retain that? Looks like it's used in, actually, North Attleborough has it for 6 months, Barnstable 60 days. So 2 towns go 6 months and 2 go 60 days. And Franklin.
So to me, this.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, you can't codify this language, but to me, it's like, all right, if you recall them and the recall fails, you shouldn't be able to recall them again for the same thing, right? So the closest you can come to doing that is put a time limit in, as to after which theoretically they would have done something else. I like the 6 months to let things settle down a little bit, but I'm not tied to it.
I'm in agreement with the 6 months. I just think, 60 days isn't a long time for someone to kind of ramp their, if a recall fails in 60 days, try again, and then another 60 days, try again. I don't know. I like I like the waiting the 6 months.
I'm not opposed to it. I think it would be too disruptive if there wasn't a provision or it was a shorter amount.
Yeah, I agree with the longer term as well.
Does anybody have a strong opinion in the opposite side? Okay, so hearing none, we're going to take this with the exception of 6 months. First recall election. Okay, one thing I did not notice, in Attleborough, they say 6 months after the first recall and can't attempt a second recall. But the way I'm reading the language, it says you can't attempt a second recall until 6 months after the first recall. No, it doesn't, sorry. I was thinking it automatically precluded you from a
Looks like you can't, if, from your summary, they can't attempt a second recall of a town council member.
Oh, that's what it is. Got it.
But that you can do a second recall for
Anybody else
that is subject to recall.
Okay. I don't necessarily agree with that provision unless somebody can give me a good reason or a opinion why that should stay or why we should adopt it. No? Okay. All right. So has to have been in office 6 months, have 6 months remaining on the term, and you can't attempt a second recall until 6 months after the first recall election. All right. How do we want to get it started right now? It's an affidavit of 100 votes. In Barnstable, it's a little bit different. They've got precincts, so 100 if it's an at-large, 50 if it's precinct. In Franklin, it is simply the filing of a petition by any one person, just naming anybody, and they don't have to state the grounds for recall. So this seems a little too loose, in my opinion. North Attleborough is 200, and in Randolph, if it's an at-large town councilman, then 500 votes. If it's what they refer to as district, it requires 150. Are we inclined to keep 100? Do we want to increase it? Do we want to decrease it?
I'm fine keeping it.
Okay. Anybody feel differently? Okay. Do we want the grounds for recall to be stated?
Yes.
Yes.
I think yes.
Me too. Anybody have a strong opinion otherwise? Okay. All right, now. Number of signatures, always the fun one. So right now, we need to get 15% of the signatures and within 30 days. I think we've determined that when we had to do this is just for reference, when we had to get signatures for the Charter Commission, within 3 weeks, we had 967 signatures, and then from my understanding, it took significant, and that 967 signatures equates to 7.6%, at 15%. If we're aiming for a 20% buffer, then it's only 6.2% of the registered voters. that being said, the towns range in amounts from 5 to 20%, and they're pretty widely spaced. So Randolph has 20% on the high end. Franklin has 5% on the low end. Franklin also is the town that doesn't require grounds being needed, nor does it require any significant number of signatures to file the petition for recall. So, hang on, I'm just going to grab the number of signatures. There it is. So we have 1,574 registered voters in this town. We know that 15% is 1886. Does anybody want to offer? Are we happy at 15%? Do we think it is too stringent for the amount of time that they had to collect? Well, I guess let's jump over to the number of days to collect the signatures, and then we can better assess what percentage we want. That's probably the fairer way of doing it. And I think that's how we did it on the last one as well for the supplemental provision. So, we are at 30 days we are on the outlier on the high end. In some cases, it is as short as 10 days from the filing of the affidavit. In the case of Franklin and North Attleborough, it is within 14 days. Well, in Franklin, it's within 14 days of the filing of the petition, which is the same as the filing of the affidavit. In North Attleborough, it is within 14 days of the petition forms being made available, meaning it's been through this process. It's gone through the affidavit process of 200 signatures, and the town clerk has certified that those signatures are valid, and that person can then be subject to recalls. From the point that the town clerk turns over the petition forms, they have 14 days to collect. Randolph is within 21 days, same as of the certification of the affidavit, which I'm assuming is going to be similar to in time frame to receipt of the petition forms. Norton is within 30 days of filing the affidavit. So that does not take into account the length of time that town clerk needs to certify those and get the petition forms available. So you've got a few days that you're losing within there. And we'll open it up to whoever has a opinion or feels an appropriate amount of time.
Can I suggest, as a starting point, we look at what we did for the referendum, decide if we want it to be the same stringent, just as stringent, more stringent, or less. Mm-hmm. Kind of take it from there.
Okay. That's fair. So going back to referendum, we required 7.5% of the voting population to be collected within 21 days. That had to happen from the day that the measure in question was passed. So 21 total days to collect 7.5% or 943 signatures of registered voters. That's our starting point. Do we feel that recall should be a higher hurdle, a same hurdle, or a smaller hurdle to overcome?